Clemson holds on to the top spot in the AP poll over Alabama by a single vote. Trevor Lawrence will be on the sideline for the Notre Dame game this weekend, and Wisconsin's season may be over. I'm Jay Smith. This is After Further Review.
And now, after further review, a Clemson student's perspective on sports.
And a personal foul on number 99 of the defense after he tackled the quarterback. He's giving them business down there. That's a 15-yard penalty.
Welcome in, everyone. I'm Jay Smith, and yes, this is After Further Review. Thanks so much for tuning in. A lot to talk about this week. Look, there's a lot going on outside of college football, but take a break from the election craziness. Let's talk some college football. Tune into the AFR podcast. Let's get rolling. One single vote, is what separated Clemson and Alabama in this week's AP poll. And goodness, if you thought everything with the election was close, and again, this recording is taking place early afternoon on Wednesday, so obviously things could be changed by tomorrow. Who knows at this point? But on the college football front, a single vote separated Clemson and Alabama for the top spot in this week's AP poll. That's the first time that we were one vote away, we were one vote away, rather, from the first tie in the AP poll at the number one slot in almost 18 years. So would have certainly been interesting. I don't think it really matters at the end of the day. And again, with the AP poll and the way that it's set up, it's hard to take it seriously sometimes. This is certainly one of those instances. I mean, listen, right now Clemson officially sits at first with 33 first-place votes, and they have 1,515 points. So they're 15 points. Now, again, I'm not privy to the exact system that the AP poll uses, because Alabama is sitting at second place, and they have 29 first-place votes, but they have 1,513 points. So it's 2 points that separate Clemson from Alabama, but it was only a single first-place vote, even though Clemson has 4 more first-place votes than Alabama. So if you can understand, if you can make sense of this, I would love to hear how it works. I don't really know how it works, but according to ESPN stats and info, again, this is we were one vote away from having a tie at the number one spot for the first time in 18 years. Now, some people, after this past weekend, right, after watching Clemson, I hesitate to use the word struggle, more just give the game away, I think, is a better description of their performance against Boston College. Listen, we're going to talk about the Clemson game before we talk about the Clemson-Boston College game before we talk about the Clemson-Notre Dame game, because I think it's important. Clemson has had a performance like the Boston College game almost every single season in recent memory. Even their national championship seasons, they had games where it looked like they may lose, like they could lose. And I think, Dabo and the coaching staff have used that as a motivator, right, to say, hey guys, we're not going to cruise to a national championship. We're not going to cruise an undefeated season. We've got to show up every day, and we've got to play, as hard as we can. Now, the difference between the games we've seen in the past, Syracuse game on the road, the Pitt game at home, the NC State game at home, The difference between those games and this Boston College game is that this was on the coaches. This was an absolute dumpster fire coaching performance across the board. Offense, defense, it just was atrocious watching this game and seeing just how poorly the coaches for Clemson handled a lot of the situations in this game. I felt like certainly when you're the number one team in the country, right? When you're Clemson and you're the number one team in the country, you're going to get everybody's best shot. Week in, week out, you teams are going to be motivated to play and try and beat you. Georgia Tech kind of just showed up and then they stopped trying. The Syracuse, game was close there for a couple of quarters, and then, Clemson pulls away, which in the past against Syracuse they weren't always able to do. But this Boston College, these last 2 weeks for Clemson have raised some serious questions. And look, there's 4 games right now left for the Tigers to play. Notre Dame, Florida State, Pitt, and Virginia Tech. Now, 3 of those 4 on the road, most notably Notre Dame. But Florida State and Virginia Tech are going to be on the road. The next and final home game for Clemson is Pitt on November 28th. Syracuse and Boston College were at home for the Tigers. And, at the beginning of this year, right, when we talked about Clemson's schedule, we said, okay, the games that are going to challenge Clemson are really, obviously Notre Dame was the one that stuck out initially. Miami kind of, I think that game wasn't as hyped up as the Notre Dame game was going into the season, but by the time the game was played, it certainly had a lot of hype surrounding it. But either way, Clemson, a lot of their tougher games were at home, and with the performance against Syracuse and Boston College and how lackluster it really was across the board, it has to make you concerned. It has to make you concerned, or at least apprehensive, if you're a Clemson fan. Now, again, we've seen this behavior. This is a consistent pattern of behavior from Clemson where, consensus, at least dominant team in their conference, picked for an undefeated season, a shot at an ACC championship, possible playoff. All these things, right? And then they just come out and they just play horribly against an opponent that really has no business giving them a game if Clemson plays to their skill level. And Clemson has repeatedly shown in the past an ability to play down to their opponents, an ability to make stupid mistakes. And this game, this Boston College game and part of the Syracuse game were full of stupid mistakes. But the difference is that it was a result of coaching. The thing that stuck out to me watching this Boston College game, and it had to stick out to those of you also watching, was the sequence in the beginning of the third quarter. We're going into the half. BC's up 28-13, right? BC's up 28-13. Clemson gets the ball. Put together a pretty nice drive. Things looked good. 7 plays, 56 yards, 3.5 minutes. No issues, right? We're good to go. Then, the score at that point is 28-19. So it's 28-19. And Dabo says, okay, let's go for 2, make it a 7-point game. That's I can understand that decision. I don't think it was the wrong decision, but okay, we're going for 2. Well, you could clearly see DJ did. I mean, there was a camera shot where it just showed DJ looking at the sidelines with his hands in the air, saying, and this was with like maybe 15 seconds left on the play clock. Like, what are we doing? What's the play call here? What's going on? So it's very obvious that Clemson had to burn that timeout, not because they wanted to think more about their play call or they wanted to see what BC was doing. They just need to get a damn play called. Clemson didn't even have a play ready to call, and they had to burn a timeout. Okay, whatever. This is I mean, we're trying to climb our way back into the game. This is an important 2-point conversion. So, understandable. Not totally inexcusable, but certainly in that situation, you can understand why they chose to burn a timeout and not take delay game. Well, coming out of timeout, Clemson lining up, they're going to go for 2, and then they still couldn't get the play off, even after having a whole timeout to think about it, talk about it, decide what they wanted to do, and had to burn a second timeout. And at this point, you could hear the boos. You could hear the boos coming from the fans in the stadium. And I'm just sitting there watching this going, what is going on? And I actually had several people I knew who attended this game in person, and they just said it was the most surreal thing because here Clemson got the ball at the start of the second half, drove the field, right? 3.5 minutes, 7 plays, 56 yards, great drive. Has to burn a timeout to get a play off. Didn't even have a play called. Okay, not great, but okay. Then goes back out there and still can't get it off. Has to burn a second timeout. Ends up settling for a field goal. Now there's 30 other instances over the course of this game that Clemson just made poor decisions. Things didn't go their way. If anything could have gone against Clemson, it all did. Right? Every single some of the catches for Boston College in the first half were just, not to take anything away from them. They were certainly great acrobatic catches, and especially that one in the end zone where the receiver kind of had to come back to the ball and turn around. But it just felt like, oh man, everything is going against Clemson. And they had no answer. Clemson had no answer. The defense in the first half had no answer. And a couple people were texting me and they said, do you think we can win this game? Because again, at one point, Clemson is trailing, they're trailing 28-10. 28-10. That was with a minute to play in the second quarter. And again, at that point, all you had seen from Clemson was a 6-play, 65-yard drive early in the first, and then a field goal to cap off an 8-play, 63-yard drive midway through the second. So you really hadn't seen much from Clemson, and Boston College had exercised their will upon Brent Venables in the defense. Brent Venables looked like a ghost. I mean, it was like, it was almost like, okay, what Boston College assistant coach dressed up as Brent Venables and was calling plays for Clemson's defense, right? Because it was just so surreal to watch such a vaunted defense and coaching staff of a defense just be completely befuddled by Boston College. And going back to the people asking, can we win this game? What do we need to do? And I just said, listen, we got to play defense, guys. You got to play defense. You've got to play defense. And they did in the second half. And that was the key to the game. The key to the game was Clemson holding Boston College to no points. Right? They shut them out in the second half. If Clemson doesn't shut out Boston College, they don't win this game. Look, the score was 34-28. Boston College scores a touchdown in the third or fourth quarter. Clemson loses. Clemson loses this game if they don't shut Boston College out in the second half. That's a fact. Take it to the bank. Now, yes, the offense for Clemson had to climb out of the hole, and they were able to do that. I thought DJ played about as well as you honestly could have expected from him. I mean, I don't know what else you could ask for. The guy was 30 for 41, 342 yards, and two touchdowns. There was a brief moment in this game where it actually switched in favor of Boston College, and that was when Boston College went up 28-10. And then after Clemson, in the third quarter started, reestablishing their momentum on offense, and they shut down Boston College on defense, it obviously dipped back down into Clemson's favor. But, there are serious questions right now about what a Trevor Lawrence less Clemson looks like, right? What does Clemson look like without Trevor Lawrence? And I think on offense, they're okay. I mean, their offense, I think, is okay. Are they going to, drive the length of the field, score touchdowns every single time? Maybe not. I think the only criticism I had of DJ throughout this game was back shoulder passes, right? Those back shoulder fade passes to the far side of the field across his body were sailing on him high. There were at least three. There were at least three back shoulder fades that were just way over the receiver. I mean, the ball just went out of bounds. I mean, it wasn't even close. Other than that, I thought DJ played very well. I thought he managed the game well from an offensive standpoint. I didn't think he made any, bad mistakes. And here's the thing, and I felt this way watching this game. It's been a long time since Clemson fans have seen a quarterback look like a freshman, right? It's been since the Taj Boyd era? Since we've seen a quarterback look vulnerable, maybe you could make the argument about Kelly Bryant, but that was such a short period that there's not a lot there. I mean, Trevor Lawrence came out as a freshman, won 15 games in the national championship, and looked like he was the second coming of Jesus. I mean, really. I mean, again, literally with his hair. And then Deshaun Watson, right, was phenomenal. It was phenomenal. Kelly Bryant, in there between those guys. I'm not saying that Taj Boyd wasn't a great quarterback at Clemson. He certainly was a great quarterback at Clemson, even though he was never able to beat South Carolina. But we saw Taj get rattled, not just against South Carolina, but in big games. And that is, I think, the last time Clemson fans have really seen their quarterback, not look invincible. Is the best way to put it. Is I think they're really the best way to put it. And so, Clemson without Trevor Lawrence is a beatable football team. Now, Clemson with Trevor Lawrence is still a beatable football team. It's just a lot more difficult. It's a lot more difficult. Even if their defense just forgets to play for the first half. Even if Clemson's defense just lets the other team just run up and down the field for the first half. I think Clemson's a very hard team to beat with Trevor Lawrence. I think they're it's manageable. It's doable to beat them without Trevor Lawrence because, Syracuse proved that it can. There are weaknesses. That was the thing that we talked about a couple of weeks ago where, at an earlier point in the season, the only team who had shown really no weaknesses so far was Clemson. Clemson was the consensus number one team. They had dominated everybody they had played, including their toughest competition up to that point in Miami. And it just looked like Clemson was going to run away with the regular season. Syracuse certainly raised eyebrows. Boston College turned heads. I mean, there were people that, I thought were not, prematurely saying that Clemson was going to lose, but certainly it certainly looked going into halftime like Clemson was, I mean, there was just no answer. There was no answer at all on offense or defense by the Tigers. And so that leads us into the Notre Dame game, right? Because Trevor Lawrence, Dabo came out ahead of all this at the end of the Boston College game and just said, look, Trevor's not going to play against Notre Dame. I assume that will hold true. Now, if if the reports of Trevor Lawrence traveling with the team and being on the sidelines for the game are also true, I'm not sure what to make of that. I'm assuming that Trevor Lawrence will not have had any reps or practice in the last 10 to 11 days, so maybe that's why they don't want him to. I'm not sure. I'm not sure at this point what it's going to look like. And again, everything is so, there's so many changes that happen overnight. I can talk about it today on Wednesday at 2 p.m. Central Time, and then by later this afternoon, it's all been changed. So either way. Right now, what we know, the latest that we know, is that Trevor Lawrence will not play against Notre Dame, but he will travel and he will be on the sidelines for that game. How does Clemson match up against Notre Dame? Because we will need to talk about that since that game is this weekend. It's fairly close. It's fairly close. Again, Notre Dame right now is 6-0. They've had their stumbles. They had their early season Duke game. They had their Louisville game. Even the Georgia Tech game didn't look very clean. But they've also played very well against Pitt. They played well against South Florida. They played well against Florida State. And both of these defenses have been fairly stout all year long. Notre Dame actually is allowing fewer points a game than Clemson by 5. Notre Dame's allowing 10 points a game. Clemson's allowing 15. I do think Clemson's offense is a bit more dynamic and consistent than Notre Dame's. Now, you remove Trevor Lawrence from that equation, and it certainly becomes more of a toss-up. My honest thoughts on this matchup in South Bend this weekend are it's going to come down to the defense for both teams. Both defenses right now are right at the 270 mark. Clemson's defense allows 274 yards. Look at how similar these defensive statistics are that I'm about to read out to you. Clemson's defense allows 274 yards a game. Notre Dame's defense allows 267. Clemson's defense allows 174 yards passing per game. Notre Dame's defense allows 173. Clemson's defense allows 99 yards rushing a game. Notre Dame's defense allows 93 yards rushing a game. That is almost identical. Almost identical. The only difference in these two teams so far this year has been on offense, with Clemson, on average, gaining about 70 more yards of total offense, 510 to Notre Dame's 440. And that also translates into points for the Tigers, right? Clemson comes into this game averaging 46 points a game. Notre Dame is averaging 34. Again, you take away Trevor Lawrence, and I think without Trevor Lawrence, Clemson's down, like we saw against Boston College, in the mid-30s. I think Clemson is a mid-30s football team without Trevor Lawrence on offense. So that really makes things interesting. Because if you look at the numbers on paper, it's essentially a toss-up. Now, do I expect Notre Dame's defense to hold Clemson to 10 points? No. Do I expect Clemson's defense to hold Notre Dame to 15 points? No. Like this game is gonna crest the 20s by the third quarter. I think that's a not a very controversial, prediction. Honestly, I feel like right now the team that hits 30 is probably going to win. I think the first team to hit 30 points is probably going to win this game. Hard to say what the momentum swings are going to look like. I imagine that turnovers are going to be a huge thing. It could even be, field position and where you are on the field. Are you getting the ball at your own 20? Or are you getting the ball at your own 40? Those things can be huge. I mean, if being able to pin teams deep with special teams, long field goals may be a factor. BT Potter for Clemson has been good in that area. And right now, Clemson's favored by 5.5. I think it's closer than that. I do. I think it's closer than that. I'm not going to give my official prediction until the Friday show later this week, but I feel like right now this game is about as close as any we have seen this season in terms of on paper, the matchups, everything. Even the leading rushers for Clemson and Notre Dame ETN for Clemson with 103, just crazy. 103 carries, 606 yards, 9 touchdowns. Williams for Notre Dame has 105 carries for 600 yards and 7 touchdowns. I mean, you just can't, almost can't even script it, any closer than this. And the fact that it's at Notre Dame is going to matter. Because, where you play games, especially true road games, those certainly have an impact. I know the environment won't be the same as if it was a packed stadium, but it's certainly something that you have to consider. I think it's very generous that ESPN is giving Clemson a 66% chance to win this game. I don't necessarily. I think this is more of a 55-45 in favor of Clemson right now. I don't know, but it's going to be a great game. Again, I'm going to save my final prediction for the show coming later this week. But either way, this should be a very intriguing matchup and possibly one of the best games, not just this season, but in the last couple of years. Of course, I said the same thing about Miami possibly being a great game, and obviously that didn't end up happening. But I have a feeling about this one. I have a feeling that without Trevor Lawrence, it becomes a much more competitive game, and it's going to come down to who can do the most on defense and create the most momentum in that department. So, again, the fact that Trevor Lawrence is going to be on the sidelines for the Notre Dame game certainly makes things interesting. As far as I know, he's not going to be involved more than that, but it's really going to be I think a game that's decided on defense and who does the most on defense. But I don't know. We will see. Either way, we're going to take a break and come back, and we're gonna look at Wisconsin's season, and obviously the recent announcements with COVID-19. Their COVID cases have gone up, and now the Purdue game, Purdue-Wisconsin, has been canceled. So does that mean the end of Badgers football in 2020? We'll dive into that discussion next. Welcome back to the show. Again, thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Jay Smith. You are listening to After Further Review. And talk a little bit now about Wisconsin. News broke, I believe, yesterday that the Wisconsin-Purdue football game has been canceled for this weekend just because of the number of coronavirus cases on the Badgers team. They had to cancel the Nebraska-Wisconsin game this past weekend after Wisconsin announced on Wednesday of last week that 12 people in the program, you had 6 players and 6 coaches, including head coach Paul Chryst, had tested positive for coronavirus after the Illinois game. Now, because of the Big Ten's condensed schedule, neither game is going to be made up, so this is going to affect the number of games that Wisconsin obviously is able to play. Now, Wisconsin is currently at 10th, and they're 1-0. I personally take issue with ranking a team really almost anywhere after they've only played a single game when almost everybody else in the poll has played at least 5, if not 6 or 7. Either way, it is what it is. For all its faults and flaws, the AP poll still exists. But Wisconsin is currently 10th. Now, they've had to cancel Nebraska. They've had to cancel Purdue. Their next scheduled matchup is Michigan on the road on November 14th. And that only gives Wisconsin 5 games left. So the maximum number of games that Wisconsin can play right now in the regular season is 6. Now, there is, I believe, still an opportunity for teams that don't make the Big Ten championship to play an additional game against an opponent in their conference who also didn't make the Big Ten championship game, which is why I'm confused as to, why can't Nebraska and Wisconsin just play that week? I don't know how. Again, maybe this has changed and I'm just not aware of it, but it was my understanding that the Big Ten was going to play. They were going to play 8 games, 8 regular season games, and then everybody would get a 9th game. The 2 teams in the Big Ten championship were going to get their 9th game, and then everybody else in the conference who did make the championship game could find a team. They pair up and buddy off. They could also play their 9th game. So I'm not sure what the status of that is. If something has changed, but right now Wisconsin is again, they have a lone win against Illinois. It was an impressive win, right? 45-7. Wisconsin looked like they were going to be a competitive team in the Big Ten this year. I don't know at this point if the Michigan game is likely. Again, Michigan has had kind of a typical Michigan year when they obviously they came out and won their game in impressive fashion against Minnesota on the road, 49-24, and then they turn around the next week and lose to Michigan State at home, 27-24. So the Wolverines are, they're typical Michigan football. But going back to Wisconsin, it's going to be difficult for them to get back up to par, just because right now the Badgers have paused all team activities. They're putting players up in hotel rooms to keep them isolated, and the number of positive, now this was as of yesterday, the number of positive tests among the team as of yesterday was 27, 15 players and 12 staff members. 5 of those positive tests have occurred since Saturday. And any player, according to the Big Ten coronavirus protocols, any player who tests positive must sit out for at least 21 days. Quarterback Graham Mertz and his backup Chase Wolf both reportedly have tested positive. You have to have a 10-day isolation period. But then also, again, the 21 days, you have to sit out for 21 days of competition. And, Wisconsin now is in real danger of not being eligible for the Big Ten championship game. The policy put in place by the Big Ten for this season, this specific season, was teams must play at least 6 games to be considered for participation in the championship game. However, if the average number of conference games played by all teams falls below 6, then teams must play no less than 2 fewer conference games than the average number of conference games played by all teams to be considered. Does that confuse you? It kind of confuses me. Either way, big takeaway here is unless the other Big Ten schools start having coronavirus problems, Wisconsin's not likely going to be eligible for the Big Ten championship game. I don't know what the likelihood of them playing against Michigan is going to be, but the school has already announced, hey, we'll give an update on Saturday, and go from there. So, it's certainly not the news that you want to hear. Obviously, I was, one among many people that were excited about the Big Ten being back, and now we have a little bit of, I think the MAC is actually, the MACtion will be back this weekend, if that's your thing. But yeah, the Big Ten right now is certainly not shaping up to be as interesting as we thought it was. My goodness, you look at the West and you see Wisconsin is the only ranked team after Minnesota has fallen to 0-2. They didn't just lose to Michigan in their season opener, they also lost to Maryland in heartbreaking fashion, 45-44. They missed an extra point in overtime, and that's this season's a wash for Minnesota. I mean, that is obviously not the way you wanted to come out and start your year against Michigan, but apparently the hangover persisted against Maryland, and they Defense, they have a lot of issues, obviously, giving up 49 to Michigan, giving up 45 to Maryland. Minnesota is, their season's essentially over. So Wisconsin's the only team from the Big Ten, from the Big Ten West that's still ranked. Now, on the East side, you kind of have an interesting, development in Penn State, right? Penn State, a top 10 team at the beginning of the year, has now fallen to 0-2 after losing to Indiana and Ohio State. They're dead last in the Big Ten East, and you have 3 ranked teams in the Big Ten East. You have Michigan at 23, who's 1-1. You have Ohio State at 2-0, and then you have Indiana at 2-0. The Hoosiers have risen to 13th in the country after beating Penn State on one of the craziest winning plays I think you'll ever see, and then beating a Rutgers team. Does anyone see a problem with that? I'm just going to leave that there. An unranked Indiana team, an Indiana team that wasn't receiving votes at the beginning of the year, beat a Penn State team on a crazy last-second 2-point conversion in overtime to, they just said, we're going to win the game, we're not going to play for double OT. They won that, and then they beat Rutgers by 16, and they're now in the top 15. Okay. Either way, this really doesn't bode well for Ohio State. That's the big takeaway here. If you're looking at the Big Ten at large, is it's Ohio State and everybody else. Okay, here's a better one. Remember how we used to knock the ACC for it just being Clemson and everybody else? Well, that's what the Big Ten is now. The Big Ten is Ohio State and everybody else. Okay, Minnesota sucks. Penn State sucks. Michigan, they're Michigan. Wisconsin can't play a game. And apparently Indiana's a top 15 team. So right now, assuming Ohio State wins the East, because I think that's the safe bet. If you're picking Indiana, I would love to know why. But if you're picking Ohio State, who are they going to play? Right now, it's more likely to be Northwestern or Purdue, 2 teams that are still undefeated in conference play and overall at 2-0. Northwestern has wins against Maryland, who remember just beat Minnesota, and Iowa, a 1-point win at Iowa. I picked the Hawkeyes, actually, in that matchup. Now, Purdue is a little more interesting. The Boilermakers they have wins against Iowa, close win 24-20, and then a very close win against Illinois on the road. So neither of those teams are going to compete against Ohio State. Ohio State's going to destroy whoever they play. So what's really, I guess, the takeaway 2 weeks into the Big Ten this season, into their season rather, it's not very interesting. Ohio State's going to win. It doesn't matter how many games Ohio State plays. They're going to make it into the college football playoff. Ohio State right now, if they go undefeated and they win their conference championship, they're going to get in. I don't know if it's going to be 1, 2, 3, or 4, but they're going to make it into the college football playoff. Most definitely. I think even if they lose a game, they're a lock for the college football playoff. There's no way right now you can sit there and make an argument about any other team, not just from the Big Ten, but really anybody else kind of pushing Ohio State out, even if Ohio State has a loss. Because again, when you look at the current rankings and the number of undefeated teams left, you have Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State, Notre Dame. Well, obviously Clemson and Notre Dame, one of them is going to cancel each other out this weekend. Let's just say, for the sake of chalk, that Clemson wins. So you have Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State, Cincinnati, BYU, and Coastal Carolina and Marshall. Those are the only other undefeated teams that have played more than a couple of games. I'm not going to count Indiana. I'm not going to count Boise State. Oh, excuse me, Liberty. Liberty. Hey, Liberty. You're chilling at 25th right now, 6-0. I was kind of knocking Coastal Carolina and Marshall last week, and hey, Coastal went up 5 spots from 20 to 15. Marshall went from 19 to 16. Probably been a minute since Coastal Carolina was a top 15 team, if they've ever been a top 15 team. But hey, apparently Indiana's a top 13 team, and they've only won a couple of games. So either way, again, what's that prove? That proves that there's Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State, Cincinnati's 4, BYU's 5. That's five undefeated teams essentially that have a shot. I'm still not giving credit to Coastal, Marshall, or Liberty because there's too much going on above them. So you got 5 undefeated teams, and I don't think of those 5. We've already talked about this. Remember last week's show. Clemson, Alabama's going to get in. That they're 2 locks there. Ohio State's probably going to take that 3rd spot, and I don't think Cincinnati and BYU are going to push out Ohio State. Okay? I don't think an undefeated Cincinnati and I don't think an undefeated BYU are going to get the nod over a 1-loss Ohio State. Not happening. Not happening. No way. No way. Now, maybe Cincinnati gets the nod over BYU or BYU gets the nod over Cincinnati, but there is no chance that they're gonna bump Ohio State out of the college football. They're not going to bump Alabama. They're not going to bump Clemson. Okay, right now, Clemson, Alabama, and Ohio State could lose a game. Clemson could lose to Notre Dame and I think still be in the hunt. Clemson loses to Notre Dame this weekend. I expect them to still be in the top 4. I think they'll be 4th. Notre Dame will probably be 3rd. Alabama will be 1st. Ohio State will be 2nd. There's a pretty sizable gap between 2nd and 3rd and 3rd and 4th. Right? So Clemson and Alabama are this close. 1 vote away. Razor-thin margin between 1st and 2nd. 3 is kind of chilling out there by himself at 1,430 points, almost 100 points less. And then Notre Dame's at 4th with 1,351. So again, almost a 100-point difference. So there's a sizable gap between 1st and 2nd and then 3rd and then 3rd and then 4th. So I would still expect Clemson to be in the top 4. I don't think they would be leapfrogged by Georgia or Cincinnati. But we'll see. Obviously, the AP poll has a mind of its own sometimes. And, again, I feel like right now the big takeaway, not just on the Wisconsin front and their COVID cases, but also just the larger scope of the Big Ten, is that the Big Ten is not as interesting as we thought it was going to be. It's what the ACC was the last couple of years, where you just have one dominant team and everybody else just kind of sucks. And everybody thought that was going to be, maybe they're going to be decent. They were decent last year. They got some key returning players, and nope. Penn State, Minnesota have been huge disappointments. Michigan has been typical Michigan, and Wisconsin can't play a game. So you're left with Ohio State, and I don't know who Ohio State's going to play right now in the Big Ten championship. I'd be shocked if it ended up being either Purdue or Northwestern. Could be. But they're not gonna lose. They're not gonna lose a game this year, I don't think. I think Ohio State walks into the college football playoff undefeated. So we'll see. There's a lot to talk about. A lot of good games coming up this weekend, though, and we will have more breakdown analysis of Clemson Notre Dame on the Friday show. Really get into the nitty-gritty of that matchup. Went over some key statistics today, but we'll hold off on making predictions for that game until later this week. And don't forget about the College Pick'em League. Make sure to get your picks in for this weekend. It's going to be an exciting weekend of college football. Fun little nugget here before we close out today's show. Clemson is 3-1 all time against Notre Dame. So that's a 75% winning percentage for Clemson, and that is the second highest winning percentage against Notre Dame of any team all time. So there's only one other team that has a higher winning percentage against Notre Dame that's played a minimum of 4 games. And the only other team with a higher winning percentage is the University of Chicago, who no longer has a football team. They were 4-0 against the Fighting Irish before they abolished their football team. And actually, I believe University of Chicago has at least a national championship or 2, and then I think a Heisman winner. So they were maybe back in the early 1900s, they were a pretty big powerhouse. Obviously, they don't have football anymore, but that little nugget, obviously interesting because Clemson right now, of all the active football programs in the country, has the highest winning percentage of any team against Notre Dame, who obviously has played them a minimum of 4 times. They're 3-1 all time against the Irish. I remember the game my freshman year was 2015. Yeah, 2015. The monsoon hurricane game, Clemson winning that one at home in the torrential downpour, I think 24-22. Ben Boulware stuffed a 2-point conversion for the Irish at the very end of that game. It was a great environment. I expect the environment in South Bend this weekend to be equally as fun and as exciting. I mean, it'll be different without max capacity stadium, but it's still, Notre Dame. It's still an iconic stadium, and it still should be a great game indeed. We'll have to see, though. Have to see how things go. Be sure to tune in to the Friday show that'll be coming later this week. Hopefully, I gave you a little bit of a distraction from all the election craziness out there. Like I said, it's a crazy week, not just for college football, but for everything going on. But yeah, we'll be right back here later this week, and we'll be breaking down more college football for you. Until then, have a good one. I'm Jay Smith. This has been After Further Review.